Become a sustaining member of the Commonwealth Club for just $10 a month. Join today.
Hello and welcome to today's virtual Commonwealth Club program. I'm Melissa Kane. I'm a political analyst and an attorney, and I'll be moderating today's program. We would like to start by thanking the Bernard Osher Foundation for supporting today's Goodlit event. It's my pleasure to introduce one of these senators from Vermont, Patrick Leahy. He's the author of The Road Taken, a memoir. Senator Leahy was elected to the U.S. Senate in 1974, and he's currently the most senior member, having spanned 9 different presidential elections and administrations. He's the president pro tempore and chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee. He's also the most senior Democrat of the Senate Judiciary Committee and the Senate Agriculture Committee. In addition to his distinguished political career, he's also an accomplished photographer and a comic book fan with cameos in 5 different Batman movies. As a reminder to our audience, we encourage you to submit your questions for Senator Leahy in the text chat on YouTube. We'll get to those. And now, please welcome Senator Leahy to the Commonwealth Club. Senator.
Well, thank you very much for that. And I enjoyed our chatting just before we went on camera. And you've already shown the picture of the book, the Road Taken. The difficult part of that road was I've kept almost a daily journal for those 48 years. That's good and bad. The bad parts about it is a huge pile, combined with my terrible handwriting, and my wife and others had urged me to write a book. And so we started putting it together. Got delayed after January 6th in finishing it. And then I found that under the rules, the impeachment of a former president, Donald Trump, that I would have to be the presiding officer of that. So we delayed this a little bit to add that paragraph. I'm glad I wrote the book, though, because I think it shows when the Senate acted the way it should, as the conscience of the nation, however imperfect that might be, and when it's degenerated into political machinations. And I'm hoping this might be an alert to new senators. We've had a good Senate, we've had a bad Senate. You've got a 6-year term, choose the good Senate.
Well, I was wondering how you managed to get so many details about things that happened so long ago. So I guess the Daily Journal certainly explains that. And I think one of the moving parts of the book, at least initially in the first part of the book, is when you arrived to the Senate. I mean, for regular civilians, when we visit the Capitol, maybe we go in and we go, wow, this is amazing. It doesn't occur to you that you guys actually might think that yourself when you first get there.
I do. Look, I was a law student at Georgetown Law School, which at that time was right down just a few blocks from the Capitol. And I used to walk through here in awe. I never expected that just a few years later, 12 years later, I'd be a senator. Although before I got too carried away with the importance, I was stopped walking down the hall by one of the very senior Southern senators. And he looked at me and he said, "Boy, how old are you?" And I thought, well, I didn't want to say 34 and a half. I said, well, next year I'll be 35, Mr. Chairman. Anybody ever tell you you're too young to be in the United States Senate? At which point my Irish-Italian temper was way up. I said, yes, my opponent for one. He loved it. I found out afterward he would kind of go like that at new senators and to see whether they were intimidated or stand up to him. Well, I've been a prosecutor for 8 years. I didn't get intimidated by very much.
And you read about how kind some of the even Republican senators were to you when you first joined the Senate. Do you want to comment on that and maybe talk about whether or not that is the case? Are there still any Republicans you can be cordial with and, share jokes with and things like that, the way you did when you first joined the Senate?
Well, it's somewhat different than when I first joined here, but I have an awful lot of Republican senators who are friends of mine. When I first came, I realized that there are moments when senators would gather together. If we had an evening session, they'd gather in the leaders' back room. There was a bar there. I was sometimes asked to be the bartender if they want to have it just very private and just be senators. And then it slowly became more polarized. So I learned one thing very much. If I may tell you a short story on this, Hubert Humphrey came up to me and said he was going to Moscow to see Brezhnev, but my wife Marcel and I like to come along, and I'm kind of blurted out, "What's the airfare to Moscow?" He said, "No, we're going to take Jerry's plane." I said, "Jerry who?" He said, "Jerry Ford. He's the president. Don't you read the papers?" And so, of course, we went. But then I realized what he had done. He had invited, as a co-leader of the delegation, the Republican leader, Hugh Scott. They were very different politically, but good friends, and had an equal number of Republicans and Democrats on the flight. And you found, as you sat around the conference room in the airplane and whatnot, you found areas of agreement more than areas of disagreement. And I have lifelong friends just from that trip. So when I was in a position where I became chairman first of agriculture, I did the same thing with the committee. Now, we had people in across the political spectrum, Republicans and Democrats, but I'd take the committee to one of the Republican states and I'd ask him to chair the hearing with farmers and whatnot. And then I do the same with Democrat. And again, we found that instead of being loggerheads, we found that we worked together, to make things work. I did the same in judiciary. I've done it in appropriations. And you learn to spend time with each other and see people as individuals. There are some who come in here who feel that they've got to make some very strong partisan statement for that evening's newscast or the latest tweet. That wears thin very quickly.
Well, do you guys get a chance to speak in private anymore? It seems like so much is recorded these days. Like, is there a place, is the cloakroom still a place where senators can chat? I mean, do you feel like there are places where people can talk off the record?
No, that's a good question. And if you want to create them, there are not enough people create them. Because I'm the president pro tem, I have very, very nice offices in the Capitol. I'm looking out my window right now, a view of the Washington Monument and the Lincoln Memorial. A lot of times we have evening sessions, quite often. Around sunset time, I'll invite an equal number of Republicans and Democrats for prayer hour and holy water. And it took a couple who weren't very religious to figure that out. And they said, holy water? I said, well, he's got single malt holy water. He's got 12-year-old holy water. And we have a number of senators that don't drink alcoholic things. We got club soda and so on. But we'd sit around there on my balcony, look at the view. And it's amazing how often we're all just chatting. We find areas we agree on. And well, I'll give you an example. We had the longest shutdown of the government during the last administration, the Trump administration. I was vice chairman of appropriations at that time, but I had brought 4 people the chair and ranking member of the appropriations from the House, the chair of our thing, and myself. And the four of us sat out there and just talked. We worked out the problem. And the relief on the part of the Republican and Democratic leaders in both bodies say, okay, if you're all agreed on it, we'll take up and pass it. And they did. And the government opened back up. Instead of these polarized, we can only have one position for the Republicans, only one for the Democrats, nothing happens.
Well, you do write, it was such a great line. You wrote that, and I'm paraphrasing, I hope I get it essentially right. You wrote that trust was the currency of the Senate, and talked about a specific, it was a great story about a committee meeting where one of the senators didn't vote the way he had promised to vote, and sort of what happened there. Can you talk a little bit about how important that is to be able to have those agreements and then execute them?
Well, when I first came here, one of the things Mike Mansfield told me, always keep your word. Even if you are going to vote against me on something, keep your word. And Ted Kennedy had a piece of legislation he'd wanted to get through for a couple of years. The very conservative Jim Eastland opposed it, so didn't put it on the agenda, but told Kennedy, if he could show me he had enough votes to pass it in the committee, he'd put it on the agenda. But he, of course, Eastland would vote against it. So Kennedy came with him, showed him the list. He wouldn't by one vote. He puts it on the agenda. Ted lost by one vote. Eastland looked down the row and said, Senator so-and-so, didn't you promise to vote with Senator Kennedy? He said, oh, I did, but I changed my mind. Oh, really? Turned to the clerk, he said, change my vote to aye. And the other senator who had broken his word was never allowed to have an amendment in that committee afterward. And, I kind of like that idea. But I've formed coalitions, both Republicans and Democrats, who, if we knew everybody's going to keep their word, if you don't, then the place falls apart.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting story. It's a great story of somebody putting the institution ahead of their own specific interest in that moment. Do you still see that happening? Are senators still generally trustworthy if they say they're going to vote for you or vote for your project or not? Can they be counted on?
Many are. Some I don't even try to ask because I know how much they change. We saw this happen in judiciary the other day where Amy Klobuchar had a bill and she could get out of committee by a one vote margin, and one senator changed the vote and had committed to her. And we adjourned, and they're going to try to work this out. There's only 100 of us. We're representing a country of 325 million Americans. Now, we may have different positions on things. Fine, state your position, but keep your word. Remember, you're not representing just yourself. You're representing 325 million Americans who go across the political spectrum. Keep your word. And I think when people stop doing that, the whole Senate hurts. And that's one of the reasons I wrote the book. I wanted people to see how it could be, has been, never totally perfect, but much better, and how we got to bring it back. If you lose faith in any of the branches of government, the whole country suffers.
And one of the incredible things about your tenure in the Senate is that you did arrive at a time when there was some change, but also some of the giants of Senate history were still there. And it's hard to point to anyone, aside from yourself, of course, today, who are the sort of towering figures, in the Senate. Is that your sense of things? And what was that like to be in the Senate with these incredible figures?
Well, it was almost like a dream. I thought how fortunate I am to be here, even if I'm here only for 1 6-year term. I never thought I'd be here for 48 years. After all, I'm the only Democrat Vermont's ever elected to the Senate. We now have an independent as the other Senator, Bernie Sanders. But as I stayed and got more senior, I found more things I could do that I really want to do. I worked to try to reopen relationships with Cuba. Before we had full relationship with Vietnam, we used what's called the Leahy War Victims Fund to help people who lost their limbs from war, usually from American landmines and bombs. But I had a strong supporter on that, somebody that served in the military, and that is George H.W. Bush, the first President Bush. And when I went over with it, I told him the story about meeting with a group of men who had lost their legs from landmines, American landmines. They were going to get wheelchairs. They'd been crawling or hopping on a stool for years. I was introduced as the person who got the money for it. One man, very slight, no legs, just staring at me all the way through the speeches. I thought, how much he must hate me, this American they fought and so on. They asked me to pick him up and put him in the wheelchair. I did. I started to get back up. He grabbed my shirt and he pulled me down and kissed me. That was pretty emotional. John Glenn, the former astronaut, was a senator with me. The same thing happened to him. John was not an emotional person. He had tears coming down his face. And when I told President Bush the story, he did too. And we resolved to keep on trying those personal things. This is not easy. You're dealing with an enemy that you fought. They killed us, we killed them. And now we have a college there outside of Saigon, the Fulbright College. I visited that with senators. I always bring Republicans and Democrats with me. And without making the story too long, I have all these young college students. And none of them spoke English as a first language. They started learning at 10, 12 years old. And I asked one young woman who was a sophomore, I asked her a question, and she said, well, when you stop to think of it, that would be indicative of, I'm like, whoa, it's, maybe there's a future.
It's just an incredible legacy of what you've been able to accomplish there and in Cuba. We do have an audience question here. Someone wants to know, what made you initially want to run for office? Because you ran for senator and that's been it. A lot of people run for Congress and then or hold other offices, but you went from prosecutor to senator, which is, not the most common way to get to office. So can you talk a little bit about how that happened at a time when as you said, you were the first Democrat elected to the Senate in Vermont in quite a while?
Well, I started off as the youngest prosecutor in the state, which I enjoyed thoroughly. I love trying cases. But then a Senate race was coming up. And my wife, Marcella, and I talked about it. We talked about the days when I was at Georgetown and I'd walk up and watch the Senate, how impressed I was with it. We knew Vermont had never elected a Democrat, never elected anybody under 50. I was a 34-year-old. I said, well, what do you think? She said, something you'd love, let's try it. You never forgive yourself if you don't, even if you lose, and the odds were that I'd lose. And we campaigned together all over the state. We had a large French-Canadian population that voted Republican in the northern part of the state, but her parents had immigrated from Quebec to that area, spoke French was the language they spoke at home, so she and her father campaigned in French. We had another area heavily Italian American and stone carvers. My mother was a first generation Italian American. Her father, a stone carver. She campaigned Italian. Nobody saw that. You know, it wasn't fitting the general. And it wrapped up to where 5 days before the election, the most politically prominent paper in the state had a big front page headline, "Poll Dooms Leahy."
Hope you kept that.
Yeah, that was a kind of uncomfortable weekend. When 5 days later, Leahy unexpectedly wins. And I thought, even if I'm there just for one term, this is a dream. I'm going down there and make the most of it. And then I saw how it worked. I saw who the good senators were, both Republicans and Democrats. You could get things done working with them. And I did, ran again. And I never thought I'd be there this long. But now
I think one of the things that can make people better senators, from my perspective, one of the things that turns people off about some politicians is that they seem really needy, like they just will do anything to stay in office. And the ability to say to yourself, "Hey, if this gets me, not elected next time, fine, but I'm going to do what I think is right here," is something that I worry is lacking sometimes in our elected officials. That ability to say, "I'm just happy I'm here. I'm going to try to do the right thing," and not just say whatever I have to say to get reelected, is something that I think the public can kind of gauge from our public officials. Is that do you attribute some of your success to your ability to go back to practicing law or doing something else?
The idea of going back home to Vermont full time, looking out over the mountains and the lakes, being able to walk down the street knowing half the people by name, that's not a terrible thing to end up with. So I love being in the Senate. I've enjoyed the people I've met, most of them. And I've enjoyed what I've been able to accomplish. But going home, like I announced last fall, that I'm not going to run again. Everybody said, "Well, are you having any second thoughts?" I said, "We're having joyful thoughts that we're going home." And if you come here thinking, "Oh, I've got to watch every single vote," you're not affected. You're not.
But one thing that you come back to a couple of times in the book is a quote by Edmund Burke, who said, "Your representative owes you not his industry only, but his judgment." This is to voters. "Your representative owes you, voters, not his industry only, but his judgment, and that a representative ought not sacrifice to you, voters, his conscience." And one of the audience questions here is, how has your concept of conscience evolved throughout your time in public office?
I think I felt it right from the start. For example, it's hard for people to think about this now, but the time I was elected, the majority of people in Vermont supported the Vietnam War. I did not. And I'd been here just a few months, and there was going to be a vote in the committee I was on to whether we continue money for the war or not. Nobody from the state of Vermont, even if they expressed concerns about the war, nobody ever voted to stop the war. Our state's largest newspaper told me I'd be a one-term senator if I voted to stop the war. With me, as a matter of conscience, I voted to stop it. There was 5 votes in a row. Each one of them, by a 1-vote margin, was to stop the war. I was told I would never be reelected because of that. I said, "Well, if you're not going to be reelected because of a vote, boy, that's a good one. That's a good one to stake your, and I quoted Edmund Burke, the quote you just used. When I voted that way, I quoted Edmund Burke. And that's been my motto all the way through. I mean, I've cast over 17,000 votes. I could go back and somebody could say, well, what about vote number 12,300, make up a number. And I might look at it and say, what the heck was I thinking? I screwed up with that vote. But at least the time when I voted, I thought it was the right thing to do.
And one person asks here, in your memoir, you talk about your freshman senatorial experience and say that you wish you were able to savor it more. What do you mean by you wish you could have or had savored it more?
Well, I was trying to juggle so many things. A young family, which I cherish, flying back and forth to Vermont, trying to learn the ins and outs of issues, and didn't take enough time to step back and say, look, some of this stuff can wait a bit. Just watch where you are. Look at Washington, D.C. Walk through the Smithsonian and some of the historical buildings. Sit down, go and listen to arguments in the Supreme Court. Take advantage of all the things that you might not have been able to do otherwise. And then later, I realized that there are a lot of things going on that I was saying, well, boy, next year I'm going to do that. I said, wait a minute, next year might not be here. Let's start doing it. And I've done more of that, and I feel better doing it. And so I urge every new senator to do that, either party. I also tell them if you've got family or a young family, don't neglect their things. I mean, I now have, our kids are growing up, I have kids of their own. Every so often they'll say, hey, Dad, remember that time you left a committee meeting early to come to watch my softball game? And it was 30 years before, but they remember. And you have to take time for that.
Well, tell me about your decision to retire, essentially, or to not run for re-election. You write in the book about conversations that you had with other people who were thinking of retiring, either from the Supreme Court or from the Senate. What about your decision to not seek another term?
I had turned down a lot of jobs that pay a heck of a lot more, and I knew I'd be bored out of my mind. Marcel and I have been married a long time. We just celebrated our 60th wedding anniversary.
Wow.
We like to scuba dive, we like to hike, we like to travel. And said, before time runs out, let's spend time to do that. Spend time, take our children, take our grandchildren on trips, and do so. We've enjoyed all this. But let's have time that's just ours now. And also, I figure I'm at the height of my abilities here in the Senate. I've seen some people stay too long, and they should have left when they did. And I respect those who could have easily been reelected, as I could have, who said, no, I've done my turns, is somebody else's. So, and then I think writing the book kind of helped to go back to the memories.
Have you, and forgive me, I'm not as up on Vermont politics, but have you chosen a successor or endorsing someone who's going to be running for your seat?
No, that's a good question. I couldn't and wouldn't choose anybody. I've had people who acted like they could choose who should be in my seat. They all lost. I don't think Vermonters would want me to do that. The nominee from our party is now our state's own congressman, Peter Welch, who's done a very good job, and he will be elected, and I will help him on the campaign trail. We have sort of a Trump advocate who moved to the state 2 years ago, they're not going to make it. You know, we've become a unique state. We've been solely a Republican state. In the last election, a Republican governor was elected overwhelmingly, and a Democratic person, she was elected lieutenant governor. So we had a Republican male as governor, Democratic woman as lieutenant governor, and people in Vermont said, "Yeah, that works." So so no,
Yeah, you don't see that much anymore. You don't see that much anymore. Montana,
No.
I think, still splits tickets, but yeah, it's really hard to find places where people are being that thoughtful about.
But it also makes our little state faces the problems everybody else does. Everything from housing, healthcare, extreme weather, not like California has been getting with the fires and all, but the fact that we can come together and do things without rancor has made it much better. And also makes it a welcoming. We were both Marcel and I were born there, make it very welcoming to come back.
I wanted to ask you about, so one of the things that's great about the book for y'all watching is that because Senator Leahy's been there for so long, it's really just sort of a front row seat to huge events in American history that I certainly watched from, the comfort of my living room, but being there and being evacuated on 9/11 and experiencing other events is really, really great. Great reading. But I wanted to ask you, Ken Starr recently passed away, as I'm sure you saw, and you were part of because you were there, you were in the Senate, you were part of the impeachment hearings that he participated in. Can you tell us what you remember about that and about anything you want to say about Mr. Starr?
Well, we had both. He was there for the Clinton impeachment and then came back for the to defend Donald Trump on his impeachment. I was never a fan of Kenneth Starr, God rest his soul, because I felt that he postured more than actually acted on things. And he was continued way beyond what the investigation might have been of Clinton's. And I'm not excusing anything that President Clinton, he's a good friend. I admire a lot of things he did. I did not approve of the thing that Starr went after him for, but it was not an impeachable offense. But it spoke, Kenneth Starr said, do this from a sense of morality. Now, when he was a chancellor of a university, he closed his eyes to a lot of sexual abuse and all going on in that campus. And I've always been bothered by that double standard on his part. He seemed to be in it more for how it affected him and what kind of glory he'd get out of it than he was in what was best for the country. I was a prosecutor. I prosecuted Democrats and Republicans, but I thought they committed a crime. I never believed his sincerity. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but that's the way I felt.
We have a question from the audience. This person writes, "It's amazing that you and your wife have been married for 60 years. Or over 60 years. What advice would you give for a happy marriage?"
Well, I'm amazed too that she's put up with me this long, and maybe that's because she's a nurse and says, "Well, this is a badly flawed person. I'll try to take care of him." but we've been fortunate. We were very much in love when we first met. We were married. She worked as a nurse while I was going through law school. We've always done things together. We've always made our decisions together. And if you have something you disagree on, work it out. Never end a day where you're angry at each other. And we haven't. But as she said, when she was asked, marry your best friend. And she really is. We go scuba diving together. We go hiking together. We've traveled. She's been in different parts of the world with me. She's gone to all the war zones I've gone with, where we're using the Leahy War Victims Fund to get prosthetics for people who've lost a limb, which requires, or in too dramatic detail, they have to be re-amputated to fit it. She'll go in the operating room and she'll help. I mean, she's been admired in some of these third world nations where people have been so badly injured for the work she's done.
I think you wrote that Fidel Castro liked her too.
Yeah, we I got into a discussion of ice cream. So, we have the finest ice cream in the world. I said, oh, we got Ben and Jerry's. And he said, I said, I'll send you some. He said, I don't care. Like that. Well, on the way out, he grabbed Marcel's arm. He said, if he sends the ice cream, be sure to pack it in dry ice. Ben Cohen of Ben and Jerry's, old revolutionary himself, he was ready to fly it down and discuss the revolution with Fidel. We had to use all kinds of things, get past the embargo to get it to him. But
we've got a question here. It says, what do you think is the most pressing challenge facing our country?
I think
if you had to pick one of many.
No, well, I could pick a lot, of course. I mean, we got everything from healthcare to education to the environment. But I think overall, the divisions we're seeing in our country, a lot of that came out at what happened on January 6th, the storming of the Capitol, where people won't trust each other, where you got to be all this way or all that way. That's not what the history of the country has been. The one time it was, we had a civil war, which damaged us for generations thereafter. There's some would like to see states break off from each other. No, the reason we've been so strong is we're the United States of America. And going into extreme partisanship of either side, I think that's a great danger to the U.S. because it's only when we come together that we tackle the problems of climate change. We work to help this state that gets hurt by forest fires and this one by flooding. We come together on that and understand that if we're going to educate children, we really educate them, not think that we have to have a very strict, only these things should be learned. No, we have so much to learn. I was lucky. I had my first library card when I was 4, and a librarian who encouraged us to read, and that opened up so many worlds. I mean, I grew up in Montpelier, Vermont. It's 8,500 people. It's our capital, but it's 8,500, and it's the biggest city for miles around. I wanted to make sure that I get diversity of thought and don't believe that anybody's got the one true thought.
It's hard. One of the things you write about actually really movingly is about certain events that you witnessed or not you weren't there, but you were sort of in the mix, practicing law when JFK gets assassinated, RFK gets assassinated, Martin Luther King gets assassinated. And it's hard to gauge because those things seem, and are extraordinary. And so today we're not seeing that kind of violence, right? We don't have the Weather Underground bombing people, but it's a different kind of fraying that's happening today. How do you, are these just apples and oranges, or was that just another, time that we got through, and maybe we can get through this one too? Just trying to understand. You've seen a lot of social upheaval in your lifetime, and how do you assess the sort of if at least two, areas of that?
Sometimes there are a wave of things, but what I worry about is the amount of racial violence and shootings, the number of shootings, mass shootings I see today. When I was a prosecutor, it was very unusual to have somebody get shot. I went to and killed. I went to all those murder scenes, but it's a very tiny amount. Now there'll be a dozen in a mass shooting. And then the ones that are racially motivated. I remember one of my grandchildren, he's biracial, wonderful, now a 16-year-old. But when he was 8 or 9 years old, after one of these racial shootings, walking home one of the safest areas of this country, in tears, walking home from school, he said, well, they shoot me walking to school because I'm Black. I don't care if you're Black, brown, white. No child should have to worry about that. And then you see what happened in Texas. You see these other places. That really worries me. And I've been a gun owner. I was on the rifle team in college. I earned my letter in college on that. But this proliferation of people having weapons you normally just see on a battlefield, we'd better face up to this. No country shows this violence unless they're at war.
We have another question here, and I'm sure you get this a lot, but we'd love to hear your comments on the filibuster, the pros and cons. And I'll just say, so one of the things that worries me about the filibuster is that there have been people who called for like the elimination of the Senate. I mean, I worry that it might do damage to the institution. And it might give people the wrong idea about the institution. That's really, I'm less concerned about like the 60 vote thing than I am like the frustration that people have with it and how it can impact potentially their view of the Senate as a whole, and the validity of it. So can you talk a little bit about your perspective?
Sure, I hear that a lot. When I first came here, the filibuster was took far more votes to overcome. And it was locked in there because some of the Southern senators used that to block any civil rights laws. I was part of a small group to change the number, dramatically diminish the number of senators to stop it. And that worked pretty well. It became a very rare thing. But now when you might see it 2 or 3 times in a year. Now when you see it 40 or 50 times, just as a delaying tactic, and senators not wanting to have to actually stand on the floor and debate something, then that's wrong. And that's got to be changed. There have been times when it's been used to protect people from, or protect us from having extreme legislation on either side. But I would argue that have a free debate. People are going to be able to watch it, come up with your amendments and vote them up or down. I don't think we're going to see the crazy wacko ones on either the right or the left if you're going to stand up and defend it. So the use of the filibuster today is greatly abused, and we have to find some way to change that.
Maybe require the actual filibustering, instead of.
There'd be a lot less of it. People, instead of running off to see what tweets they can get out or what news show they can go on, they actually had to stand there and do the debating. There'd be a heck of a lot less.
This person asks, is there a skill or quality that you've developed over the years that you wish you had had at the start of your political career? And if so, what is that?
I think I wish I had known the legislative process even better. Remember, I'd been a lawyer, a trial lawyer, a prosecutor. I felt I knew that very well. I'd never served in a legislative body, and I found that there were a lot of things. It took me a while to figure out the intricate Senate rules. Now, because I preside so often over the Senate, I know them very, very well. But I wish I had known them better when I first came to the Senate. But you know what? I'll tell you one good thing about the Senate. And this is what I love about it. I feel I'm learning something every day, even after 48 years. I read hundreds of pages of memos written by people. I mean, a lot of issues coming up. I say, okay, I want your best memos why this should be supported, and the best memos why it should not be supported. And I learned so much. It's like having a graduate course every year and things, and that I do appreciate. And I didn't realize it could be that way when I first came here. But developing very, very good staff. I joke that senators are merely constitutional impediments to their staffs, but I've had such great ones that you learn every single day. It's graduate school on steroids sometimes.
Well, that's actually a great segue into this next question from our audience, which is, what do you think you will miss the most about political life, and what will you miss the least? What won't you miss about being in politics?
I will miss sort of having my favorite courses from either law school or undergraduate school almost every day, in the issues that come forward and the wonderful people who are showing me all these in the argument. That I will miss. Fortunately, some of my favorite newspapers and other media things I can have online wherever I am in Vermont. And I'll be doing things with our university. So some of that will be there. What I won't miss is the rancor and the politicization I've seen from so many members. I won't miss the deterioration of debate that I see. I'm hoping my book will be one little nudge to people go back to the way it used to be. It doesn't mean you have to agree on everything. You're going to have different issues than you had then, but approach them in a way of trying to find out what is the solution, not for your political future, but what's the best solution for the country.
Well, we also have a question here that is, and you talk in the book about great advice that you got throughout your career from various sources, but this person asks, what's the best piece of personal or professional advice that you got, and who is that from?
Keep your word.
Mm.
And that was from Mike Mansfield when I first came there. He said, think what you're going to agree to, but then keep your word. Don't lie. Tell the truth.
Well, I hope you'll tell us the truth about Barbara Boxer and Dianne Feinstein. You talk a little bit in the book about the year they were elected and the Senate got a bit more diverse. Were you able to work with any? You know, we're Californians. We would love some any anecdotes or observations about California's senators, either Boxer or Feinstein, Harris, that you have.
I like them all. I've traveled with them. We've had meals together. We talk, we joke. It's probably just as well there hasn't been a microphone in the room when we've been there with our spouses. Of course, Dianne lost her husband here recently, who had a great sense of humor. And no, I felt lucky to be able to serve with all three of them. I asked Kamala Harris to come on the Judiciary Committee when I was chair, and she did. And just a remarkable legal mind, and one who did not, when people would come there, testify for the committee, thinking they could know her or pull one over on her, whoa, the rest of us sit back and say, just watch. And so I know I like them all, and our spouses got along well, and I think California did pretty well. Besides which, when I came there, it was an all-male body, and we improved considerably. We started getting women in there, and I've encouraged that. For example, the first time I had a chance to be chair of appropriations, realized it never had a woman as chair. The next in line was a woman. I passed up being chair and said another committee, so we could finally have a woman for the first time. I did the same thing on the Agriculture Committee. And then when I had my choice of being the senior Democrat on Judiciary or on Appropriations, I stepped aside so Dianne could be the senior Democrat. Again, because there had never been a woman in that position on Judiciary. And I tried very, very hard, encouraged, I've campaigned for women all over the country. And I think we're going to be adding a woman as a member of the House of Representatives. We get all of one, even though when we joined the union, Vermont had more people than California had when it joined the union. All you had was hundreds of miles of coastline, gold, silver, great grazing area, and everything else. So you probably brought more to the country than we did at that time.
But no, Vermont was a very important part of the union, the 14th state, as we were talking about a little earlier. I wanted to ask you also about Batman. We got to talk about this because I'm reading your book and it's beautiful and it's this, sweeping look at history. And then there's this way that you got yourself into 5 Batman movies. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, it's sort of by accident. As I said, I started reading at my first library card when I was 4. I read all of Dickens and Mark Twain and everything else, but I knew what day the new issue of whatever comics came to a local store, and I'd be there. And I always liked Batman, and I practically memorized them. And by coincidence, talking to the people who published Batman, they talked about something. But I said, no. In the spring of 1946, about the 4th page, he did something entirely different. They're like, yeah, okay. They go back in the archives and say, damn, he's right, or darn, he's right. And so that led to me writing the preface to, they had a 40-year anthology of it, and I wrote that. And then they asked me to be the voice of one of these animated Batman things and pay a lot of money. And I said, sure, I'll do it if you give the money not to me, but to the children's library in Montpelier, where I first started doing it. Anyway, I had a great deal of fun with that. Then they asked me to be in some of the regular Batman movies. Again, I did with the stipulation we'd give the money to the children's library. And we now have a beautiful new library that's for everything from children who are
the Bruce Wayne library.
It's just part of the main library, but there is a little bat signal up in the ceiling. And I don't want to bore you with this, but I was volunteering at reading hour, these 4 and 5, 6-year-olds. I got stuck on a question. I grabbed my cell phone. I said, I'm stuck on a question. I need your help. Are you nearby? Door opens and a burst of smoke. In walks Batman. Here's these 4, 5, 6-year-old. He couldn't figure out the question, but they figured it out for him. And so he goes, I want to thank you, children. Oh, you're welcome, Mr. Batman. I just
what a fun thing.
I just wondered when they went home. Oh, Batman. Certainly he was here, but most importantly, Batman came in.
Yeah, that's what they remember.
Yeah, really. It was fun.
What a fun skit. That sounds really great.
I do a lot of photography. Always have. I've loved watching how they make these movies. I mean, sometimes for a 30-second part, they may take 5 or 6 hours to get all the angles. So I've enjoyed as much walking around talking to the photographers. How do you get the right lighting? What do you do with this and that? And, it can, we had Heath Ledger who played the Joker, had a knife to my throat after I told him we're not intimidated by thugs. And they said, well, were you scared by him? I said, I've seen scarier guys in the Senate, which was a dumb thing to say because the first question the press said, oh, which senator is scarier?
Yeah, who? That ties in nicely to a question here from the audience. It says there have been many movies and TV series about the political scene in Washington, D.C. Do you have a favorite one or one that comes closest to being real?
I liked West Wing. Some people thought it was too stylized, but I thought that was good. I enjoyed watching it, and some of the things you see, I'm like, you just couldn't do this. And then sometimes when I get home, I just do not watch a show. But I've seen many that were well done, but I kind of like West Wing. Some thought it was corny. I thought it was great.
This person wants to know, is there a quality that you and Batman share? Or maybe something about Batman that appeals to you the most? Is it just toys? You like gadgets?
No, I think that the fact that he has no superpowers like the Superman and all these others, he has to use his mind. His body is obviously in better shape than I am, but
same.
He had to use his mind. He had to figure out, and he had a sense of justice and what's right. The fact that he did, his mental powers were always one step ahead of everybody else. That appealed to me.
And we have this person who wants to know.
I like the car too. I've actually been in one of them, or a couple of them.
You got to be in one? Was it the one that goes upside down?
You had to flip up like this. It was in the last couple of Batman movies. It's almost like a tank, but it's a lot smaller than it looks. And I'm well over 6 feet tall, so that was a bit of a
Have you ever used your height like LBJ to kind of tower over someone and squeeze their hand really hard until they until they agree with you?
It came in handy trying cases as a prosecutor.
Mm.
And I didn't realize at first, but it really did. And I'm glad I'm tall.
I want to ask you two quick questions. One is, before we wrap up here, one is, this is from the audience. They want to know, for those of us who live on the West Coast and have never been to Vermont, what is the one thing that we should, that someone visiting Vermont should see or do?
Well, in my state, driving through the mountains is beautiful. I love going along the shores of Lake Champlain. That's about the largest lake in the country outside of the Great Lakes. It borders New York and Vermont, goes the length of Vermont and goes up into Canada. I mean, you can get on that. You can take a boat and go up to the Atlantic Ocean. I think it is absolutely beautiful. And if they want to know more about it, there's a center right on Lake Champlain in Burlington, and they'll give you all the history from back to when it was it was a salt lake out there, probably the inland oceans. They had fossils of whales and sharks and everything else. And then just stop at a small country store and just talk to the people. That's what's going on. You'll learn a lot.
Better than a poll, for sure. We have one last question, and this is something that a viewer submitted. Forgive me, viewer, I know you submitted it a while back, but I was holding it until the end. I wanted it to be the last question. And that is, what gives you the most hope for America?
Some of the letters I get from around the country, the book has only been out for a couple of weeks, but some of the letters I've gotten from people, total strangers to me, say, you give us hope. We got to start working together. We got to start listening to people we might not agree with. And that gives me hope.
Oh, well, that's really lovely. I'm glad to hear there are people out there who hear your message and it resonates with them. And want to thank you so much, Senator Leahy, who is still a senator and took time out of his day to be here with us. So we really, really appreciate that. His book is A Road Taken, a memoir. And we encourage everyone to pick up a copy at your local bookstore. If you want to watch more programs or support the Commonwealth Club's efforts to make virtual and in-programming possible, please visit thecommonwealthclub.org/events. I'm Melissa Kane. Thank you, Senator Leahy, and thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Melissa.